Good evening, everybody. It's Hoz. I am doing the first and inaugural presentation of the No to Conscription League. We are live across, I believe, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and a few other places. So I'm grateful for all of you to come to join us tonight and watch the first time we do this show. We've got some amazing guests this evening. We've got Mick Stott, who is a 30-year veteran of the British Army. He has played a critical role in our party's neurolinguistics and has been a part of training a lot of our party members. And we're going to be talking to him because he is an Army veteran, and I'm looking forward to get his insight on what he thinks of the no conscription. We've also got Warren Thornton, who is part of the warrenthornton.com, who has been working on Ukraine and everything to do with that whole sphere of influence and combat that's taking place. So he's going to have quite a lot to tell us about what his opinions are on conscription and how the conscription works in the Ukraine and where we are in Ukraine. And we've also got our deputy leader, His Excellency, the ambassador, former ambassador to Syria and Bahrain, Peter Ford, who is going to be standing for us in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election that's taking place, that's been vacated because Mike Amesbury, the former MP who has now resigned, attacking one of his constituents on the pavement, which he served 3 days in prison for and bound to be recalled back. And so now Peter Ford is representing the Workers' Party, and we'll be talking to him last out of everyone. So I just wanted to have a quick word, if I would, just to tell you the history of conscription in the United Kingdom. We've never really had conscription other than during World War I. And in World War I, the war started in 1914, but we didn't have conscription until 1916. And when we had that, it was men who were aged 18 to 41, and they were drafted after the 1916 period of time. And it was finished in 1920 because they didn't want all of those men coming back or basically sitting in the army. And we had again another set of conscription that came in, and that conscription was for World War II, which was 1939 when it started, and it went all the way through to 1960. So that's the history of conscription in the United Kingdom. And the men that we started with in World War II were between the age of 20 and 22. And by the end of 1941, it was 18 to 51-year-olds were asked to get conscripted. And women, for the first time, were also between 20 and 30 conscripted to do work, war-related work. So they were working as nurses or working as drivers or working in factories. So that was the conscription that's taken place before in the past. What we're facing at the moment is a huge shortage in the number of people who are being accepted by the British Army to become servicemen. We've had over 1 million people apply to become members of the army, and hundreds of thousands of them have been rejected because the army's got such high standards for physical exercise or physical training levels, and they're not willing to drop their standards. Last year, we had 9,400 soldiers retire, resign, come out of the service, and we had 6,300 go in. So we've had a deficit of people. We're sitting at 76,000 people as the British Army at the moment. That is the lowest level of the army or the British Army being since the Napoleonic Wars. So that's where we are at the moment. That's the situation we're in. We are being told that we may need to have conscription, or we're not made. They're trying to backdoor us into conscription. This is what the Labour Party is trying to do, because some generals in the army or in the armed forces have turned around and said that we need to have an army of 120,000 people, and getting our young children, and I call them children because they're only just going to be 18 odd years old, forcing them to be conscripted and maybe end up on the front lines in Russia, which is what this army, that's the only reason we need conscription, is because we have had this narrative built around how Russia is such a dangerous country to us. I'm not happy about what's happening, which is why I've decided to get involved in this organization. And I would hope that tonight will be an eye-opener for other people on why maybe this is not the best thing that can happen to our country. We really don't need conscription. It's something that is normally the poorest people in our country that end up having to carry the shoulder the majority of it. So with that being said, I'd like to bring Mick up and get him to explain a few things. Hi, Michael. How are you? Good?
I'm really good, Hos. Hello, everyone. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you for the invite.
So, Mick, what I'd be grateful for is if you could just give us a little bit of a background on who you are. I've said that you've been in the army for 30 odd years, but a little bit of background so people know that when you're talking as a person that knows what you're talking about. And if you could just start for me with, what do you think the appetite is for war against Russia amongst British people as the first question, but a little bit about yourself first. And if you can answer that question, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, sure. Well, I wore this cap badge for the best part of 30 years. I was a Royal Engineer before I wore that cap badge, before I transferred into the Army Physical Training Corps. And I held a number of significant appointments. As a Royal Engineer, I was a combat engineer. So I knew what it was like to be stood in the pouring rain at 3 o'clock in the morning when it was freezing, knocking in pickets, laying mines, diffusing mines, blowing up bridges, laying airfields and track bays. And so I understand what it's like to be in that kind of environment. I've also been an op-tours myself. So I know what it's like to be in a combat environment as well. Now, the key thing is that during my tenure in the military, I served at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. So I held a couple of significant appointments. One at the Academy, training officers. I led William and Harry through their officership. And I also held an appointment at the Directorate of Individual Training Policy Branch Army at Uphaven, which is the headquarters. So I still brush shoulders with some of the guys that are making the decisions at that level, because I also participate in ultra-distance events, and that attracts some of the guys that I used to serve with. In fact, some of the younger guys that come through, because our cap badge is such a specialised cap badge, there was only 300 of us throughout the army. And so we all pretty much a very small group of people that still talk to each other. And it's really interesting because, the first question was about the appetite for war. Well, war sounds very fanciful. And of course, a lot of people watch the movies and think that it's this glamorous situation where you can get shot 6 times and still be walking, facing the enemy. Well, that isn't the reality of any of that. But you have to take a look at how, I would say, some of our younger people are now educated. Because one of the biggest challenges that we face at this moment in time, and it's not just the forces, it's also the way our children are educated. They're educated in emotional intelligence, which a lot of the guys when I came through and the later periods, they weren't. And so now you have situations even in training where people are not very robust. Anyone that's been involved in bigger industries, and I work with some bigger companies, anyone that's been involved in those industries would recognize, what they call the Gen Z people. And I have no real opinion of that outside of, if you have an operational function to maintain, then there's going to be some standards that are connected to that and are associated with it. And I'm afraid if you're not robust enough to be in that environment, it's possibly the worst environment you could ever be in. I also specialize in mental health. So I saw the impact that things like COVID had on mental health, and that hit a very large proportion of the country. So when you combine our education with some of the young people that are coming through, and you look at how a lot of them lack mental and physical robustness, I mean, even if you look at PT in the schools these days, it's nothing like what it looked like years and years ago. This idea that you can participate and it doesn't really matter if you come last. But actually, being in the military, it does matter if you come last, because that generally equals that you won't be around to enjoy the show for much longer. And so, you know, some of the basic tenets of the military, you know, the harder we sweat, the less we bleed, those would fall on deaf ears, I think, if you introduce them to our current groups of young people who, for me, have become very, very woke through our education system. And I hate to use labels because pejoratives really are not useful. It's much better that if you're going to have an outcome, that you have the capacity and the raw material to train to produce that outcome. And I really don't see that. I see with the current groups of youngsters that we have within our educational systems, definitely lack robustness and totally lack the attitude that would be required to step into a combat arena. And I reckon that's why you'll find that the wastage rates within recruitment are so high.
I was going to ask you that very same question. Do you think it's a physical thing only, or is it because I've read another report that says 38% of people would never ever want to join the army in the country, and that's a report and a poll that's done. They will never ever want to do that, and will never want to be in a position where they're going to be conscripted and would want to do that. They become conscientious objectors and not want to get involved in it at all. So is that somehow or another, do you think, is reflected in this generation that we've got now?
Well, Hos, yeah. I mean, why would you want to go to war? You know, look at even the word conscription. If you have to conscript, we are a volunteer army, and have always been a volunteer army. Now, whichever way you look at it, if you look at the average rates of leaving the military, when people go into combat, it's not unusual for a significant percentage of the regiments that have gone in, for those individuals to want to leave because they start to have the reality of it. And in this educated society, why would anyone want to put themselves in a situation where they might have to take another life? Because whichever way you look at it, it might be the soldier that makes the decision, but it's definitely going to be the human being that has to live with that decision when you return from military operations. And there's quite a process of awareness that's involved when you do sign up and you decide to put yourself on the line. Now, they do say that one pressed man is worth 20 one volunteer is worth 20 pressed men. And of course, because we were a voluntary army, the moment you stray away from that, then all you're simply going to do is exacerbate a resistance to whatever you want someone to do.
Yeah.
And believe me, even within a voluntary army, when some of the most recent conflicts, if we look at the Gulf and we look at Iraq and look at some of those conflicts, there was a tremendous amount of resistance in people to even engage with that. Exercise Saif Sharia demonstrated that an awful lot of people, when they were told pretty quickly that they might go into combat, there was a massive pushback from some of those regiments. So there isn't the same idea around war or flavour to engage with it. And certainly within the civilian community, I don't know why anyone would volunteer for it when you consider how some of our veterans have been treated when they've returned from combat. In so much that you've still got people being taken to court over crimes in Northern Ireland and Iraq. You know, 8.2 million spent on the IHAT investigations when that could have been better spent elsewhere on helping veterans that come back.
Would you say there's a lack of appetite to get involved in combat once they're out there? And is that out of fear, or is that out of just saying, look, I don't want to be taking human lives? What is the story there?
I think it's a combination of everything. Some people think it's exciting. It's an environment that's exciting. And I can assure anyone it's completely devoid of excitement. In fact, once you have the reality of the environment, you start to realise that you're never really fighting for king and country. You're actually fighting for the man to your left and the man to your right. And of course, you know, when you look at anyone with an ounce of common sense, if you look at the numbers, you know, so we have, let's say, just short of 100,000 troops going in to a place where you're going to be meeting 1.5 million. Well, I would say the odds are not exactly stacked in your favour. Not only that, if you look at the armaments that the Russians have and the access to weaponry, so it's not like it used to be. So, you know, the idea that it's all sort of easy fighting, or that it's, you know, it's going to be a simple situation, is just, that's not present. And I think anyone that's reasonably intelligent would know that.
So that leads me nicely into my next question to you is, how do you feel the existing members of the armed forces feel about the prospect of actually going to war with Russia? And I mean a hot war, and not just sitting there and nothing. Do you think I just want to know, what do you think? Do the British Army people think there's a good reason to be there? And also, do they want to go to war with Russia?
Well, I think veterans are pretty well versed. All the veterans are not stupid, and certainly post Iraq. And if you look at the serving members, I was at a dinner just before Christmas last year, and I was chatting to a regiment that were told then that they would be going to Ukraine. So it almost makes it look like, you know, Keir Starmer would like us to believe that we are making sovereign decisions, when in fact we're not a sovereign force. And some of the guys I chatted to were definitely not happy by being tasked by the UN. But what Keir Starmer has yet to admit to is the fact that we were signed up to 8 EU contracts with the UN just after Brexit was signed by Brockbank, Langley and Robbins. So this idea that NATO is right at the forefront, I'm not quite sure what sort of a credible organisation NATO is, because at this moment in time, we are currently being tasked by the EU, by von der Leyen and those oligarchs that really have taken away our sovereignty, because it was given away by Theresa May under her tenure as Prime Minister. But it was a really hot potato in Parliament at that time. And a guy called Major General Campbell, who was the commander of 5 Brigade that led us into the Falklands conflict, he tried to raise awareness around this, but was shouted out at every angle. So we don't even have a sovereign force anymore. And that doesn't sit well with the average soldier. But it's generally a small percentage of those people that know that that's going on. It's not a motivator, because the British Army always had a level of esprit de corps. And, you know, there was a lot of esprit de corps with our cap badges, and we felt that we were part of a very special and elite force. But I don't think that exists anywhere near in the same proportions these days.
Can I just ask you to just give me a bit more? What do you mean by sovereign? As in what sense? Do we not have control over our armed forces? Is that what you're saying?
No, we don't. So when the EU defence strategies were signed up to by Brockbank, Langley and Robbins at the London School of Economics, it was Brockbank that boasted that he'd just pulled the wool over the Brexiteers just by the use of flowery language. And he was overseen by our friend Boris Johnson, who, to be fair, I would only ever follow out of curiosity. You see, when you look at some of the people that they want us to follow, it's worth remembering that British Army officers undergo an awful lot of rigorous training, which develops us at the level of moral courage and our tenacity, and your values and standards are installed during all of those periods of training. But the challenge that you have is that they're now dealing with people that are happy to send us into conflict from Brussels, who are unelected people, by the way, as far as we're concerned, and we no longer have our sovereignty when it comes to our armed forces.
That's bizarre.
Well, that contract became live on the 1st of January 2021, and it was a very, very hot potato in Parliament and in the period leading up to that. And now you have Keir Starmer retrospectively trying to be honest on the level, because he's trying to re-engage with the EU, but in reality, we're part of that defence strategy.
Whether we like it or not, even though we had Brexit, it makes no difference whatsoever, because that's completely outside the Brexit thing. Okay, so that's a military alliance that we're in, and Brexit had no impact on it.
Oh. And that was after Brexit was signed, so that shows you how devious that group of people were in terms of what they did. But equally, you know, as you know, Hoz, these people don't plan for 2-3 years ahead. These people are planning 10, 15, 20 years ahead. So nothing happens by chance.
Yeah. Mick, what do you think of the government's attitude towards volunteering the conscripts to the British Army? What what do you think of that? I can see you laughing. Good. Carry on. Tell me why.
Well, you see, it's just as well that the most recent conflicts have all been volunteers, because how many of their sons and daughters do you think you'll see on the front line? You know, when it comes to conscription, I think it'll be selective conscription. I actually think a lot of it's fear mongering as well. I think Keir Starmer is doing so badly in his position as Prime Minister that if he creates these types of fear smokescreens as well, this distracts a lot of people off the real issues. Look how Rishi Sunak managed to get the weight of the vote against him just by mentioning conscription and that he would support it. Well, for me, I agree with George when he says that they're two cheeks of the same backside, because they've both got the same strategies, and this idea of conscription would create more fear than anything. I can see that being a game changer.
Good. Mick, thank you very much for helping us out tonight with from the background of someone who's been in the army for the last 30 odd years. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the very first inaugural show. I'm sure you'll be back again. And I'm going to go to speak to Warren Thornton. Warren, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm absolutely fine. How are you, Hoz?
I'm good. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you very much for being here. And I realize that where you are, I'm sure you can tell people that it's the most ungodly hour of the day, but you're here with us for the first show, and I really appreciate your time here. So Warren is an expert on the, I'll let Warren explain who he is to you guys all. Warren, I'll just start straight away, if I may. I'd like you to cover, if you can, because you're a specialist on Ukraine. And I know that you all of this stuff goes out on your own warrenthornton.com platform, but what's the current situation like in the Ukraine right now? If you could just give us as in-depth as you want and can, so that people understand, because I'm going to be moving a bit further in and I'll talk about peace negotiations. What's the latest situation in the Ukraine right now?
Well, the latest situation in the Ukraine right now is absolutely dire. The Kursk Oblast, which of course they moved into, as you can see. Now, if you have a look at the connection there, at literally where the blue, the very top blue one connects to the purple one there, that's roughly the area of Kursk that they went into. Now, they had an effort, shall we say, in Belgorod, which is slightly across to the right from there. And of course, the Ukrainians went flying into there. Now, the British Army had a lot of input into that. The very first place they went to was Zaporozhye, when they went into, basically, they tried to get a border across the river across the Dnieper River, trying to get a, shall we say, a foothold in Krinky. The British helped the Ukrainians organize that. They got slaughtered there. They got slaughtered in Belgorod, and they've been slaughtered in Kursk. And basically what happened was this, shall we say, this incision into Kursk was quite crazy, because it was never going to end very, very well. They went to try and get the nuclear power plant in Kursk. It didn't work. And for months, they've had many, many men slaughtered. They've lost over 65,000, close to 65 to 70,000 men in Kursk. And of course, we have these figures from actual people that I've been speaking to. I've actually been speaking to a British mercenary who fled out of Kursk, and he said how horrible it was. Now, there's a main road coming out of Kursk that is called the P200. Now, that leads from Kursk into the Sumy Oblast, which is that the first blue oblast you see at the very top there. And of course, they were trying to get away down that road, and they were getting picked off. There were 15, 20 drones at a time, picking off the vehicles and picking off the men. And he was part of a group that were going as quickly as they could to get out of that region and back into Sumy. Now, of his party of 9 that had to do it on foot all the way, only 3 of them survived. And he said it was just a mad dash with groups of, 8 to 10 people hiding and then trying to move at night, because it was totally impossible to move during the day, because Russians had total firepower over that road. And the situation came about because they actually took 2 brigades and put them elsewhere to try and capture mining concessions, one of them in They put one group into Pokrovsk, and they put one into Turets to try and capture that open cast mine back that the Russians had taken. And of course, they got slaughtered. That left Kursk very, very weak. And only yesterday, the first F-16 got shot down. Basically, what had happened was it went to help with another mad incursion into Belgorod, which the Ukrainians are trying to do, or trying to hold on to a piece of Russian land as a bargaining chip. It was there first thing in the morning, and then, of course, it attended in the afternoon as well. And by this time, the Russians have moved an S-400 air defense system up to the front line. It was chased into the area by a Russian Su-35, and basically the Ukrainian pilot was shot down, and he was killed along with the F-16 crashing as well. Now, we have to say, when they made the mad dash, and of course Zelensky is saying it was an orderly retreat, it was nothing of the sort. We've actually spoken to people who were there, not only on the Russian side, but on the Ukraine side as well. It was a mad dash for the front line, and that was really a problem. And the other problem they have is there's still 2,500 troops trapped in there. Of course, they'll say that they're not surrounded, and they completely are. They're in little pockets. And at the moment, there is only 3 little villages that the Ukrainians are holding on to, and they're having a difficult job holding on to them. So we're looking at 60 to 70,000 men who have been slaughtered. Now, literally, when they did the incursion into Kursk, there's a place called Sudzha, which is very much the center or the hub of the Ukrainians, and that got absolutely completely roasted because the Ukrainian gas pipeline that they turned off, the Russians actually charged through that pipeline with 800 men. And of course, the Ukrainian troops thought the Russians were in behind them. They were encircled, and they decided to do a quick run, literally panicked, and decided to take off for the border.
Warren, I want to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, just want to say that our British Army is 76,000 odd people. So that many people have died and you've said slaughtered, the word you used, slaughtered. Nearly that many people were slaughtered by the Russians. This whole plan was done by the British Army. Yes. So can you imagine that situation where our people, our troops, being led by the same, I'm going to call them donkeys, to the slaughter of all of our troops near enough? That is a complete mind, I can't handle it. And I don't want our troops to suffer the consequences of the inadequacies of the people that have obviously got these Ukrainian soldiers killed. I don't want I don't want this to happen to British soldiers. I don't want it to happen to our troops. So I hope to God that situation doesn't come up. I wanted to ask you another question. I've been informed reliably by people that there are French, German, and British troops in some of these enclaves as advisors, and they're likely to get killed as part of the operations if they don't surrender. And it's going to be an embarrassing thing for them, or for us, to have our troops arrested and taken to jail. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Well, it's a little known fact that a couple of NATO officers got killed in a place called Kavoy Rog, which, of course, is the birthplace of, or the place where Zelensky used to live. And the problem that you have there, of course, is that they're all, and they don't learn from this, they all migrate to the same hotels, these mercenary soldiers and NATO, of course. And there were 2 French NATO guys killed in one strike in a hotel there, and a couple of other NATO guys killed in another strike there. Now, we've got that from French military intelligence. Our source in French military intelligence absolutely says that it happened. Now, what you've got is these advisors going in, and of course, Putin has been very, very specific. If you remember, only a few days ago, he turned around, and of course, Donald Trump very carefully turned around and said, please show anybody that's left in Kursk mercy. And Putin turned around and said, anybody that is a Ukrainian soldier, of course, will be showed mercy if they lay down their arms and surrender. But of course, they have committed all sorts of crazy war crimes in the Kursk region, and we've got videos that prove that quite clearly. where they've executed civilians, and that's nothing new. They've been doing that since 2014, which was the reason that Putin went in 2022. And that's all, you know, you can very easily see that from Human Rights Watch and everybody else that was in the area at that time. So, of course, the Ukrainian soldiers will be allowed how can I put it? They'll be allowed to surrender, but anybody else will be treated as a mercenary soldier or somebody who shouldn't be there, and therefore is not covered by the Geneva Convention.
Well, all I say is that interfering is going to end up with egg on our faces. So I want to talk about the peace process or the ceasefire and everything else going on. What are your thoughts on the latest peace negotiations with the Ukraine? Do you think what Donald Trump is doing at the moment, is he being an honest broker, or is he being one-sided or the other, or is he, you know, what are your thoughts on Donald Trump and the actual peace process? If you can just give us a bit more detail about that, I'll be grateful.
Not a problem at all. So when it comes to Donald Trump, this wasn't a war he started. This wasn't a war he wanted. This was basically Victoria Nuland and the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a lovely name for the CIA, decided that they were going to get rid of the democratically elected Ukrainian government in 2014. And they did this by use of the Maidan. And of course, as usual, as we see in Romania, Serbia, everywhere else, you get loads of people suddenly turn up. They have a protest, and then the protest starts violent, and then of course people die, and then of course the world goes, oh my God, it's such a terrible situation. Let's get rid of the government. Now the UN and the EU played a big part in that, and of course ever since then, since 2014, we have Poroshenko, who took charge of Ukraine and said to the people in the eastern Donbass that we will make your children hide in cellars while ours go to school, and then started 8 years of a mass slaughter of the ethnic-speaking Russians in the eastern Donbass. Now, the peace process is a wonderful and very tactical masterclass by Vladimir Putin, because, as we know, there is this, shall we say, agreement not to strike each other's energy sectors for 30 days. Now, the Russians, very simply, Ukraine do like to hit the Russians as often and almost every day with drones because their missiles get knocked out of the air, so they have to use drones. Now, the problem you have with this, of course, is Putin really didn't give up anything, because he hits Ukraine's energy sector about once every 6 weeks. And of course, they hit them in one big hit all over the place with these missiles. So, of course, he didn't give up anything really at all. Now, Ukraine have to face reality, and so do the warmongers of the EU. Now, the European Union are going quite crazy over this. They're very, very upset because they're not involved in the peace process. Why should they be? It's nothing to do with them. And it really is nothing to do with Ukraine, apart from the fact that Ukraine have been used to, should we say, fight this war as a proxy war. And of course, it's really a negotiation between America and Russia, and that's what's going on. And there's something else that you might want to know as well, is the fact that Zelensky's been kept out of this peace process after his terrible efforts, should we say, in the White House. And of course, J.D. Vance was quite right to tackle him about the case of conscription. Now, you may not think so. I have hundreds of thousands of videos from Ukraine people showing the conscription, where they are actually grabbed, thrown into a vehicle, and then they're thrown onto the front line with about 2 weeks. Now, just to give you an upside of this, in Kursk, 18 to 24-year-olds were used. Everybody said they wouldn't be, but they are. They were meant to not be on the front line. Well, they threw them into the front line so that they could escape. And of those 4,018 to 24-year-olds, 80% of them are now dead on the battlefield in Kursk. So that just goes to tell you everything you need to know about that. And the real problem that we have, of course, is that they will do everything they can to scupper this peace deal. And you have to remember that the last 3 times that we've had a peace deal, the Minsk Agreement, Budapest, and we've also had the one that was meant to be in Istanbul. Of course, the Ukrainians have broken this. And every single time they move into one of the, shall we say, the ethnic Russian-speaking oblasts and start killing people. So unless you get to a point where you literally give those 8 oblasts and Odessa to the Russians, this is going to happen again further down the line. no matter what peace process you come up with, no matter what's signed. And please remember that you start, first of all, you get the rules for stopping a war, then you sign a peace process. 30-day peace process for stopping any more action just basically gives Ukraine time to rearm. And of course, the Europeans are mad as hell because they're not involved in the peace process. And really, neither are Ukraine. It is really to do with the USA and Russia and drawing the borders of where it's going to stop. You have to remember that America are on their way out. They did the same thing in Korea, did the same thing in Vietnam. When it started to go bad, out they went. And of course, they did the same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan. The same thing is happening in Ukraine. They want to be more involved in the Middle East, and they have the upcoming war with China to organize in 2027, 2028 over Taiwan. So Ukraine's a loser. Let's get the hell out and leave Europe holding the ball. And of course, when they leave, they always leave somewhere more of a disaster than it was before they went in.
Warren, I need to ask you another question, which I think is quite important, and it might be slightly off-piste, but I want your opinion on it. Some would say that this war that's taken place has actually been the war of the West, with the might of all the money that they've got that they can throw into Ukraine to try and destroy Russia. And Russia has shown the resilience that it showed in World War II and the resilience that it showed under Napoleon, that this is a country that has got the attitude of no surrender to ever. They will never, ever give up their land, and it's ingrained in their blood. And now we've got von der Leyen turning around and saying they're going to spend 800 billion euros on their defense package. And I've been told that they don't have anywhere near the capacity that Russia has for creating arms. What are they going to do? Repurpose every factory that has a Mercedes-Benz going out of it to start building tanks, to have wars with Russia that they don't need to have? What is going on with this European Union that have decided now? I just don't understand it. And Russia has not invaded Poland. I've got friends of mine, English friends, who turn around and say, yeah, they're going to invade Poland, Lithuania, this, that, and the other. And I said, guys, Lithuania was given its independence in 1991. So was Estonia. Why didn't Russia invade them? They've had 35 years to do that, and they haven't. Oh, they're going to invade them next. What do you think of all the scaremongering and warmongering that is created as a narrative to try and basically excuse people to lose their money, to lose their taxes, to have our money spent on weaponry that doesn't need to be used ever, because Russia is not actually a threat? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when we're talking about von der Leyen to start with, remember she sold, or literally her husband was involved in, shall we say, the vaccines. And of course, whatever your thoughts are on that, of course, her husband got jolly rich by the fact that she was able to sell 8 doses for every single person in Europe. And of course, she is one of those. And Starmer's coalition of the willing, as they say there, is going absolutely nowhere. And of course, they're getting Australia and of course New Zealand and various other countries, Japan, to try and join in. I'm sure Papua New Guinea will be sending poison darts and blowpipes as well. But the problem that they have with the EU, and it is a massive thing, is when you look at there is still, and there is no, you have to look at the neo-Nazi brigades that started this and carried out the ethnic cleansing. Zelensky actually went to the border to tell them to stop, and they said, we didn't vote for you, you're not our president. And of course, von der Leyen, when we look at Callas, who has literally worked with a group called NAFO, which are actually people who raise money for these Azov battalions, which are these extreme lunatics that they have. And of course, what we've got is we've got Kaja Kallas, we've got Ursula von der Leyen, we've got Annalena Baerbock, who hates the Russians. All these women have very, very strange connections to, shall we say, grandfather Nazi past. We've got lots and lots of people in various countries saying that the Russians are going to invade. They're going to do nothing of the sort. They went in there to try and stop the ethnic Russians being killed. Now, there are literally, if you take away Crimea, there's another 8 oblast where, of course, the Russians do not want to get shall we say, involved in another Vietnam. So they'll quite happily have the Atoll Blast at 80% Russian speaking. They've no real interest in going to Kiev, but if they have to, they will. And very simply, their things have not changed there. The SMO that they wanted to take part in, that's of course going to carry on until, of course, the root causes are seen. And of course, the West had a panic, didn't it, where it turned around and it went, look, here's what the Ukrainians want. That was America finding out what Ukraine wanted. That wasn't the Russian, what the Russians wanted. Nobody had asked the Russians up to that point, but everybody was presenting that, including Keir Starmer and most of the people saying, oh, well, the ball's in literally in Russia's core. But Russia had not even said exactly what they wanted. And of course, at the moment you vote anybody in who's remotely wants to have peace with Russia, like in Romania or Serbia or whatever, we have an overthrow. So much for freedom and democracy.
I've got one last question. I need you to give me the shortest 2-sentence answer to that question is,
okay.
Do you think there's an appetite for the British Army to go and fight people in Russia? Do you think there's an appetite at the actual soldiers and our armed forces, an appetite to go and fight in Russia against Russia?
Absolutely none at all. And I'll give you a quick précis of why not. First of all, we don't know the language. We don't know the topography. We've never been in a drone war before. In fact, we've been asking Ukrainians that we've been training over here what's it like. So that gives you an idea. We haven't been in trench warfare since 1945. And the short answer is when the Russians took Bakhmut, literally in the space of 8 months, Ukraine lost 120,000 soldiers dead.
Wow.
Good luck with fighting that war inside Ukraine.
Warren, I'm so grateful for you coming to talk to us. You have enlightened my brain, and I'm sure everyone else listening to you as well, with all your deep knowledge of the Ukraine. Thank you so much for taking part, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Many thanks. So our next guest is His Excellency, and I call him His Excellency, is Peter Ford. Peter Ford is the Deputy Leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. He's a good friend of mine, and I am grateful that he's able to join us tonight because there's going to be quite a few things we need to talk to him about. So, Peter, thank you very much for being here tonight. And you're one of the leading lights of our Workers' Party. And I wanted to find out with you, and I'm going to jump straight in with questions, if I may, because there's quite a lot of things that I need to ask you. And afterwards, I want to talk about Runcorn as well, and I don't want to run out of time. Do you think Saudi Arabia is doing a good job, or did a good job, in bringing the Ukraine and the Americans and or not the Ukrainians, but the Russians and the Americans, doing that peace process and brokering that peace? Do you think they've done a good job? And are they the right people to bring the Russians and the Americans together?
Thanks for that kind introduction, Hoz. I'll try to live up to expectations. To answer your questions, the Saudis, I think, were a good choice. They are not particularly beholden to the Ukrainians. I suspect the Ukrainians were not actually very happy by Trump's choice of Saudi Arabia as a venue for talks. The Saudis are big enough and strong enough and rich enough not to depend too much on the United States, and they have quite good relations with Russia. Also, the choice of venue, an exotic, unexpected location, adds drama to the peace talks. And what the people, the Saudis are not mediating. It's supposed to be America that's mediating. The Saudis are just providing a venue and atmospherics. And I think the atmospherics are good in Saudi Arabia. They bring this exoticism. They bring this aura of power and drama. So I think that's all good. The Saudis don't have an agenda of their own. An alternative venue might have been Istanbul. And in the early days of the conflict, Istanbul did see peace talks. But Turkey is a member of NATO, and Erdogan often has his own selfish agenda to push. So I think Saudi was quite an excellent choice, to be fair to Trump, and it must have been Trump's own personal choice.
Yeah, I think I think you're right, Peter. I think that it was maybe it was Trump's way of gifting Saudi Arabia a place on the world stage as the people who have organized this, and maybe that's his way of saying, giving them a nod as such. Do you think that Trump has been an honest broker here? Because I remember him saying, I will stop this war in the first 24 hours. So we're not in the first 24 hours. He has tried to stop the war, and we both know, because we're sitting there in British politics watching our government with Keir Starmer trying his best to keep going to war. And in fact, he's leading the charge, as far as I can see, for people who are against the peace that Trump is trying to organize. Do you think that Trump is being an honest broker here? And how much pushback do you think he's going to keep getting? And I want to know, is he doing the right thing, do you think? Or is he, what do you think of what I've just said, basically? Just tell me what you think of that.
Well, I think a real, genuine, honest broker has to be cruel to be kind, has to tell people like the Ukrainians some things they don't want to hear. And this is what Trump has done. This is what he has brought to the party, a dose of honesty. In the famous White House meeting, he said to Zelensky, you'll recall, but you've got weak cards, or you got no cards. Yeah. That was the exact honest truth that the Ukrainians and the Europeans needed to hear, but which they refused to hear. And I'm afraid that Trump is being stymied at every turn by the Europeans, goaded on by Starmer. Starmer is working at cross purposes to Trump. But just to go back to Trump for a moment, full marks to Trump for having the desire, the energy, the will, and the nous to get things moving quickly, but low marks for execution. His idea of a short 30-day ceasefire during which talks on the long term would take place is a non-starter, really. And there's a read across here to Gaza. He tried the same approach with the Israelis, and look how that is turning out. The Israelis pocketed the gains from phase 1 of the Gaza peace deal that Trump worked out, and they're not prepared to enter into meaningful discussions about the second, more difficult phase. On the contrary, they're kicking over the traps and destroying the gains from phase 1. And this is exactly what the Russians fear will happen if they agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine. In fact, Gaza is illustrating how correct the Russian position is and how unwise it would be on their part to buy a pig in a poke, a ceasefire that would only allow the Ukrainians to regroup, mobilize yet more American and European support, and then rekindle the conflict, emboldened by the fresh support that they've been receiving. And this is what has happened with Israel, and Trump has shown himself powerless with the Israelis to defend his own deal. If I were Putin, I'd be bringing this to Trump's attention. You expect me to trust you, to believe you, when I see what's happened to the Palestinians? Come on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that the whole situation there is a lesson to be learnt for Donald Trump and for the world, that I don't think Donald Trump can have control over what's happening in Israel. He is the junior partner when it comes to the situation over there. The Israelis just do whatever they want to do, and they're bloody minded about it. And what they're doing to Gaza and what they did on the 18th of March was something that, you know, it's quite cynical, really. Some people have said, or not said, it's an actual fact that Benjamin Netanyahu had to be in court on the 19th of March, and an attack was launched on the 18th of March to stop him going to court because he was busy in the middle of a war again. And he was going to have to give evidence in a trial against himself. But that's another thing. I really want to focus back onto our own situation in our own country and at the moment. So I think you've discussed Britain's, you know, policies on the conflict. What I'd like to know is, how would you personally, as a former ambassador, how would you want to see Britain behave at this stage? What would you expect? You know, if you were sitting there as a special advisor to the Prime Minister, I'm not suggesting for Labour, but as the sitting Prime Minister, how would you, as a former ambassador, speak to him and ask him to do what's right? What would be the advice that you would give him as the advisor that he would listen to?
Hos, I'll come back to your question, but can I just finish on the earlier question about the Gaza and what conclusions Putin will be drawing? I think Gaza illustrates that Trump is not as all-conquering back home as he might think or might like the world to think. He's got at his back neocons who are rabid Russia haters and Israel lovers to a man and a woman.
Yeah.
And so far, he's carried them along, many unwillingly, but he has brought them along on Russia. And when you stop to think about it for a moment, that achievement is pretty enormous. That people, right-wing Republicans, have been brought practically to sup with the demon Putin. There's a cost. And I think part of what's going on with Gaza is that Trump can't afford to upset the Israel lobby if he wants to sustain their support for his Russia-Ukraine policy. I may be completely here, and it's just that Trump loves Israel. But I don't think he loves anybody except himself.
Correct.
Everything is transactional. And I think he's in a way giving up the Gaza pawn, his achievements on the ceasefire in Gaza, to sustain domestic support for what he's doing on Ukraine, which is running now into choppy waters. He's failing to make significant headway. He's beginning to look somewhat feeble, accepting now crumbs from the table of Putin in the shape of a partial ceasefire, which itself is holding up terribly well. But to go back to your question about Britain, the British policy is totally wrong-headed, and any serious foreign policy professional not blinded by prejudice or money can see this, that the policy is not good for Britain and not good for Ukraine. I mean, why don't Labour practice with Ukraine the policy that this week they've been advocating for young people? Have they not been saying to young people that you have to be kind? We're going to take you off a life on benefits. Well, Ukraine is a country on benefits. Think about it like that. Zelensky is a snowflake youngster being spoilt to think that he can live forever on Western benefits and be shielded from the real world.
Yeah.
Interesting thought and parallel. I think that is what's going on. And the British policy is just encouraging the Ukrainians in their illusions and therefore prolonging the agony. Now, in domestic political terms, it may make some sense. We can't deny that Starmer is having a sort of mini Falklands moment, and he's milking it to the hilt. But it can't go on very much longer as people begin to see that it's hollow and unworkable. And all this posturing now this week, having meetings, bringing generals from all over the world to talk about the modalities of a peacekeeping force, it will soon collapse in the harsh glare of reality. And that reality is that Russia will never for a moment accept Western troops in Ukraine. So it's all posturing, and hopefully we can help people, electors, to see that it's just posturing. They don't actually have a policy on Ukraine. They have a suite of postures, a narrative, but an actual policy to make outcomes better, they don't have, and they're not interested in having. It's all about them and how they are positioning themselves. You see, they're even getting support from the Conservatives, for heaven's sake, although that shouldn't surprise us. They put Nigel Farage in an awkward position. He doesn't know whether to go back or go forward. So they're just trying to play domestic politics on the backs of Ukrainian poor soldiers and civilians.
Right, Peter, we don't have a lot of time left, but we are going to overrun a little bit because I definitely want to talk to you about Runcorn and Helsby. You are the candidate for the Workers' Party. You were the first person to be declared as the candidate, one of our candidates, or the candidates for that area. So far, I checked today, the BBC has still not mentioned you, other than I did a quick search of your name on the BBC, and the first thing and only thing I found was your position on the situation in Syria from 2017. And I just want to say that I've sent them a letter as the National Election Coordinator for the Workers' Party to tell them that you are our candidate. And to date, once again, the mainstream media, which is ITV, Channel 4 and everybody else, have chosen to ignore the fact that the Workers' Party have got a candidate. So this is our opportunity to talk. And I wanted to talk to you about, if you had 4 or 5 things that you could tell the people of Runcorn and Helsby, whether it's the economic crisis over there, whether it's the transport and infrastructure, whether it's the NHS, whether it's housing and community, and tell us a little bit about your position on these subject matters and Runcorn and Helsby as a place, because I understand that this is where you have lived all of your life. So you are a Runconian, as you call yourself.
Exactly. And so far, I'm the only person actually from Runcorn in the field among the candidates who so far have been nominated. So I'm selling myself partly on that ticket. A real Runcornian, someone who loves the place, grew up there, went away for my career, but then came back. I had a choice of going to California, Dubai, or Runcorn. For me, it was a no-brainer. So there I am in sunny Runcorn by the Manchester Ship Canal. As what I offer voters, in a general election, things are different. You're offering a manifesto. Not the same in a by-election. By-elections are much more basic and simple. People are often more interested in registering a protest vote, and that is part of what I offer, or we offer. The Workers' Party offer a chance for disappointed Labour voters to vote for a party of the left, but we are left populists. But many of us come from a Labour background. We are a natural home for disaffected, real, genuine Labour people, for working class people. That is the clues in our name. we're the Workers' Party. We are the authentic voice of the working class. That's a big part of the message I want to get over to the people of Runcorn. And we're not purveyors of snake oil like Reform. Reform in the opinion polls seem to have been making headway, and many people, including in Runcorn, are tempted by their offer, but many others are mistrustful. And they're right to be mistrustful, because Reform are just Tories given a retread, virtually indistinguishable on their practical policy from the Tories. And indeed, they're part of the soggy centre with Labour and the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, and now Reform. And you see Reform tearing themselves apart because Farage wants to take them even closer to the centre, to the core of the establishment, but there are still some rebel souls in Reform pulling in the other direction. Local issues will figure prominently, and just today I went to a migrant hostel or asylum seekers hostel on the edge of town, which has been a focus of attention. And I drew attention to our own Workers' Party policy, which is to share nationwide the burden of these asylum seekers hostels. People shouldn't be billeted on poor, neglected towns like Runcorn. They should be billeted in places like Bournemouth and Exeter. Have better weather there as well. And the second part of our message, of course, is stop the boats, stop the wars. If we didn't go around invading or punishing countries like Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria, then there wouldn't be so many asylum seekers in the first place. So we offer a long-term solution to stop the problem at its roots. Stop the boats, stop the wars.
With you, we live in a country at the moment where we've been following the Americans into every conflict they've ever started. We are literally their lapdogs, and we're dragged into all sorts of places. We're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, what's the best way for people to be able to reach out to you and your team? What is the best way for them to contact you? Is it through Twitter, Facebook, or is it all of them? And
well, we're on Facebook. We're on Twitter, X, of course, and we can be reached through the main Workers' Party website. Just by Googling Workers' Party Britain, people will soon be led to the information they require, and we'd welcome lots of supporters to hand out leaflets and join us in the campaigning and sending money. Please.
Right, so we do have a donation, a crowdfunder that's in place for Peter as well. I'll make sure that it's put into the comments across all of the various platforms that this is going out on at the moment. So if those of you who can and want to can help the candidacy of Peter Ford, you'll be able to have an opportunity to help out in any way you can. Peter, I wanted to say thank you very much for taking part. As usual, I'm grateful for your time. You're a very wise person, and when you talk, people listen. So I hope we get to see you in Parliament so people can hear you talk, and we make these people who are happy to see our kids go to war and get conscripted and fight for wars for BlackRock and everyone else, will hear your voice and understand that this is not something that we want to see happen. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Right, everybody, I just wanted to, I'm not going to take too much more of your time. I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking part in this first inaugural No Conscription League podcast, call it what you will. I am hoping to run this once a week for everyone. And I don't know exactly who we're going to have as our guest for next week, but if you can tune in, same time, same place, it'd be greatly appreciated. And the important thing is that you need to understand, as Peter said, We as the Workers' Party of Britain are an anti-imperial party. We're not interested in having wars with everyone around the world. What we'd like to do is live in peace with the people around the world. And we don't want, and our party will never, ever be a party to inflicting harm on other countries. We are not interested in causing mass migration of people from all over the world to Europe and to our shores, which is exactly what the Labour Party have done, which is exactly what every single government, whether it's been Labour or Tory or Labour before or Tory before, have ever done. They've just dragged us from one war to another. With the Workers' Party, you get a party that wants peace. You want a party that's not interested in killing brown people or white people or funding wars forever and ever. Let's see if we can get the 2 billion out of 26 billion of the black hole that we had, instead of sending it to Ukraine or sending it for extra defense. If we can have that spent on the people in our own country, maybe we can have that spent on the old people. It's coming to the end of winter, is finished now, but a lot of people suffered because our government chose to send our money to Ukraine and other places like that, rather than looking after the old people in our own country. We've got disability benefits coming in right now. Those disability benefits are going to get cut because we don't have the money. But whenever we need money for wars, it's somehow magicked up. So I'm going to leave it as that, and I'm going to end it there. All I say is, please join us for next week, and I hope that we'll be able to have better speakers every single time to help you guys understand that conscription is not something that we need for our future as the British society. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate all of you across all the platforms for all the comments you've made as well. Thank you very much and good night.